You're experiencing the Authentic Chaos Podcast, an exploration into our inner selves and journey of self-discovery. I'm your host, Vahagan Yernosian, and I wanted to apologize for not being last week. I was on a bit of a trip, and so sometimes I'm not going to place episodes out busy or when I'm not feeling. And lately, I hadn't been feeling inspired. But I recently did get some inspiration on this recent trip. I was out in Las Vegas, which is always a lot of fun. And I was there for more of arts purposes this time around. I went to a festival and I got to experience Meow Wolf's Omega Mart. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Meow Wolf, they're a company that works with a bunch of local artists and creates these immersive experiences, these immersive art experiences. And I think it's a really interesting way of modern art expanding or transforming what modern art is into these more perception warping and immersive experiences where we get to put ourselves more into the perspective of the artist. And that's got some really cool implications. But first, as a little bit of a clerical thing, unfortunately, our hostess, Sandra, here had a bit of an issue. She got a little sick when I repotted her. She seems to have recovered and is stable now. But for those of you wondering why Sandra looks a little lighter today or a little less planty than she used to be, unfortunately, there were some unfortunate implications on the. But I think we are stable. We're going to wish Sandra much love in her recovery. Okay, going on. So what is the point of this? What do I want to get out of this episode? I want to talk about some of the things I've been mentioning all throughout my conversations. I mention a lot that perception is highly personalized and that we're all living highly personalized existences. And I want to dive deeper into what that means, because it's not just that we create this narrative in our head of how things are. It's also how this narrative creates assumptions that changes how we view the world. And there are a lot of really cool experiences that we all have that we've all experienced, or many of us have experienced, that illustrate this and that you can see for yourself. Now, a big motivation for this, not just the trip in Vegas, but a big motivation for me to explore my own perception and to understanding how maybe the concept of reality that I had grown to accept wasn't actually an objective reality, but was in fact just a hyper-personalized reality, was when I read the book Deviate, The Science of Seeing Differently. I'll put that up here for those of you who are interested in seeing it. So it's a book that I highly recommend. It is written by a neuroscientist, and it culminates 30 years of neuroscience research in how we understand perception, how our brains create meaning from the eyes and the senses, explaining things like why phantom limbs, why the phantom limb effect is a thing, why optical illusions are a thing for us, and why certain patterns mean things to other people, or certain sounds mean things to other people and doesn't mean anything to others. So, and a lot of it they found is that the way you were raised, the way you were born, biology, all of these play into effect in how our mind creates snap judgments based on images that we get. So before we even get to decide whether or not we have an opinion on the world around us, our mind, our biases, our assumptions have already filtered the information that we get into what our mind has deemed important. And a lot of these are very important survival mechanisms. When we were hunter-gatherers or when we were a developing species, there were predators that could easily kill us if we weren't fast in seeing them, if we weren't fast in hearing them. A lot of the data that we're getting from our eyes, our ears, our nose, our taste, our touch, a lot of this is noise. There's so much of it. Just think about even the scene set forth in this picture, in this video, there's a ton of things going on in both the foreground and the background. Maybe some things matter and some don't. Maybe you didn't notice the image that I have here. There we go. Maybe you didn't notice that image for a while. Or maybe you didn't notice this smoke detector. There's so many things that if your mind doesn't deem that important, it won't notice it. In the US, for instance, there are studies that show that we focus more on the foreground, the people that are immediately here. So maybe you've been more focused on me, my lovely hostess Sandra, maybe my cool little thing here, my cool sign, but you haven't been focused on the background, like the art that I have on the walls, especially the one right behind me. There we go. That's what. And that's okay, because culturally we have been grown to focus more on the foreground. But in the Japanese culture, they have a more holistic view. So they actually they will focus more on the image as a whole. So then maybe they'll miss some of the minute details of the face, but they will get the full background. Well, and none of these are wrong. It's just that it's an example of how culture impacts how we see the world. And if our judgments are based on the things that we are seeing in the world, then how we see the world will directly impact our judgments on that world. And that's why it's important to recognize, and what helped me recognize that I was putting myself in a box that I didn't need to be in, was when I realized that a lot of the truths that I heard were objective, or that a lot of people accepted, aren't necessarily objective truths. Things like how to live your life, how you should see the world in certain ways, how you should view success. A lot of these are just as subjective as whether or not you like the color green, or whether or not you focus on the foreground or the background. These are completely subjective. And if we take control over them, and if we take intention and trying to be more intentional about what we're focusing on and what we want, how we want to experience the world, we can start to try to change perception. And part of it, I keep saying this, part of it is awareness. That's the first thing that we have to do. We have to be aware that we have these biases and that we are making these perceptive leaps, and that our perception is unique to us. And I have some really cool, so maybe you're saying, oh, Vahagan, I'm a pretty reasonable person. I have a very objective, very grounded world. And maybe I don't think this affects me. Well, I know this still affects me. I mean, I know I'm like not fully complete on my journey, but we're all just trying to make it through. But here's some examples of some effects that I've reflected on as excellent ways of depicting the highly personalized realities that we live in. So think about picture this scene. You're sitting on the water, or maybe you're by some large body of water. It's a nice sunny day, or the moon is not out and bright, and you see this beautiful ray of light reflecting on the water directly from the light source to you. And it's beautiful. The contrast with the water is really nice. It's very shimmery. But have you ever thought to wonder if other people are seeing that same beam of light? Is it also still pointed at you, or is it pointed at them? If you move to a different spot on the beach, does the beam of light follow you, or does it stay in place? If we lived in an objective universe where our perception was completely objective, shouldn't that beam of light only be in one place? And more so, does it make sense for light to be in specific beams when really its light is emanating from a source in a spherical way to similar intensities? The sun is far enough away that it's not sending a signal beam of light directly at us. It's instead sending tons of photons, tons of light particles all over the galaxy. And it just so happens that we are seeing it represented as these rays of light. But these rays of light are illusions that our mind creates. They're not real in the objective physical sense. It's just that our brains have gotten to the point where we filter out all of the other light that isn't coming directly at us, and we focus on the stuff that is being reflected off of the photons that are being reflected out of our eyes. That's the more scientific way, but the light that is pointed at us is what we focus on. And so from that, you could say that, okay, maybe our perception is relative, is very personal. We think that these rays of light are pointed just at us, but they're pointed at everyone. But because we can't see from other people's perspectives, maybe it makes it difficult for us to understand that. Here's another thought that I was thinking of. So one of the cool things about immersive art exhibits is that you get to, in a lot of art, you have to be told what the artist's perspective is. And a lot of the beauty of the art comes out when you start to understand the story of the artist. If we didn't know the pains that Van Gogh, for instance, went through, the madness he went through to create the works, and maybe even like some of the sorrow, maybe some like eye issues that he had or color issues that he had, where he saw things differently. And this perspective, if you aren't familiar with it, it might seem like the paintings are interesting, but maybe aren't like that special. But once you understand his story, his perspective, how he came to like the pain that he was dealing with and how he used art as an escape, start to see the painting from his perspective. You are starting to see a little bit of the world as he saw it. And it creates a lot of great value. I mean, maybe you've heard of the Van Gogh immersive experience. It's been going on around the U.S., and it's been very popular because it's taking art in a new direction. It's taking these old classics and using them to tell a story of the work of the artist behind it. And through that, starting to experience the art through different media, through touching, through maybe 3D, through VR experiences, we get to understand the art in new ways. And that starts to get us to see the art from the perspective of the artist. Another thing that, so through this, so it's great when it's old art, right? Because we already know the story of Picasso. But what about new art? And so this takes us back to, I mentioned that I went to Vegas and I went to Meow Wolf's Omega Mart. And it is this super cool, it is this really deep, immersive experience where it starts off by showing you things that are like, out of the ordinary, a little peculiar. The details and the thought that go into it are to create this unique and deep world is really exciting and really fascinating. And the deeper you get in, the more you start to see the perspective of the artists themselves. And these are many artists. It's not a single artist, which makes it even more impressive. It's this culmination of local artists creating this story, and you get to see some of the pains in the cultural zeitgeist, the things that people are thinking about, the conflicts that are happening today. And mixed within it is playing on the theme and playing with light, playing with your perception, putting different shimmering lights on the wall, playing with sound and how we perceive sound. In some cases, playing with smells and playing with how we perceive the world and how we even perceive or how we can differently enter doors or portals to different rooms. A lot of this is getting us to re-experience the world in ways. In yoga we call it the beginner's mind. Trying to get your mind to be less rigid, trying to accept that maybe we don't understand everything. Maybe our life is so personalized, our perception is even personalized. And so maybe we should start to question some of the basic assumptions that we have. What would happen to us if we started to question our assumptions? It might first seem pretty chaotic and pretty scary, but it's not life-threatening to question our assumptions, especially if we do it in a safe way around people we know and love. In fact, questioning our assumptions is one of the most important ways for us to really expand our consciousness, expand our connection with ourselves and our connection with others and with the world around us. Maybe, for instance, I've talked a lot about how weather affects people hugely. And so maybe we shouldn't be so upset when we see clouds in the sky. Maybe instead we should be grateful for the contrast it creates so that we can appreciate the beauty of the sun and the colors that come out in the beauty of the sun. Maybe there are other things we can do in those cloudy days that would be excellent and an excellent way for us to live with our homes and within our environment. And then the clouds stop bothering you. You don't have to tie your unhappiness to the clouds. You don't have to tie your perceptions to what the biases that we think we have in the world, how we think the world works. That ray of light that I talked about, it is heading toward you, but it's also heading toward everyone because that is how our minds work. That is how our minds work to create this picture of a world for us without us being overwhelmed with incessant noise. But sometimes the mind works in ways that maybe are limiting us. Maybe in the US, by focusing on the foreground and not just the more holistic view, we're missing a broader story. Maybe in Japanese cultures where you have the holistic view, but you don't focus as much on the foreground, you're missing the minute details and the beauty and individuality of the people you're talking to. There's no right or wrong here. A lot of this is about exploring what works for you and taking that conscious, that intentional effort of saying, this is how I want my world to be. This is how the world makes sense to me. I shouldn't limit myself to these assumptions that happened, that were set in my mind before I was even able to comprehend what those assumptions were. Maybe I want to take back control of my own life and how I view the world by losing that control that my mind had. It's kind of paradoxical. These assumptions are a way for our minds to control how we view the world and thus how we interact with the world and how we judge the world. But when we decide to take the control back from our mind and try to see the world more of how it is, maybe we won't see the world how it is objectively speaking, but we can try out different perceptions, different filters, if you will, and see which ones work for us. Maybe we try to switch a couple of them. Maybe we play with our perceptions a bit. Maybe we try different things out, see things from different perspectives, even if it's like ducking to look at something versus standing to look at something. Something that I noticed that I do while I was on this trip is that so my girlfriend she's quite a bit shorter than me. So when we were at the festival, before I would find a spot for us to stand, and I would crouch down a little bit to get at her eye level to make sure that she could see too, because I know that I'm pretty tall. I'm able to see very far, but being shorter is more difficult for her to see, and I wanted her to have a good experience. And this is like a small example of how we can literally change our perspective just by changing where our eye level is relative to the ground. Just doing that will give you a completely different perspective on the same scene in the same world that we have. So I highly encourage you, take that leap, take that experiment, try changing your perspective of the world and experiment with how personalized and subjective perception really is. And if perception really is subjective, then maybe it's subject to change. And what that means for you, we can explore on later episodes, but just take that leap. try it out. Take notes. How do you feel before and after? The more you try, the more you practice with playing with your perception and trying out different perceptions, the more experience you will have with the easier it'll be in the future. And the more experience you'll have with just questioning your most basic assumptions. And I think that's helped me the most in my journey of figuring out who I am. Just questioning why I do what I do. Because now I have answers for why I do what I do. And because I have those answers, I know I'm able to tell who I am and what I like and what I don't like. And when I can tell when things are going in a way that I'm happy with or not. I understand who I am on a much deeper level because I gave up control of who I thought I was in order to explore who I could and who I ultimately wanted to be. And it's a beautiful thing. It gives you a lot of options in this world, and it gives you the freedom to live life exactly as you want it to be, not how other people expect it of you, but how you want it. Bring that intention into your perception, and let's expand our minds together and expand our consciousness. Thank you again for watching this. If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, please like and share and subscribe to the channel or follow the channel. It really helps out a lot. And I'm hoping to have some more conversations coming up soon. Really excited just figuring out scheduling. So thank you again. And as always, embrace your chaos with kindness.